General Hospital will reveal Tracy had been silently playing a long and methodical game from the moment the corrupt congressman attempted to frame her for the ketamine scandal, a reckless and baseless accusation that could have permanently destroyed her reputation if not for Jason's timely intervention. But what truly ignited a deeper fury in her wasn't merely the false charge itself. It was Drew's arrogance. His smug belief that he had successfully maneuvered around her, that he could conceal his clandestine affair with Nina without anyone suspecting, and worse, that Tracy, of all people, would remain in the dark. Drew had drastically underestimated the one woman in Port Charles who never missed a lie, never ignored a pattern, and never forgot a betrayal. What he didn't understand was that Tracy had known about his secret entanglement with Nina for quite some time. But instead of exposing him right away, she did what Tracy always did best: she waited. Watched. Calculated. She let him believe he had escaped her scrutiny, let him bask in the illusion of control, all while quietly collecting evidence, one piece at a time, until the moment to strike would arrive with devastating precision. The arrival of Gio, a nephew she never knew existed, momentarily shifted her attention, pulling her into a new storm within the Quartermaine family. Helping Gio navigate the shock of his lineage and guiding Brooke Lynn through the emotional fallout became Tracy's visible priorities. And yet, behind that composed exterior, her mind never strayed far from Drew. She compartmentalized with the efficiency of a strategist, offering comfort with one hand, and loading her arsenal with the other. Tracy knew that swift forgiveness only emboldens the dishonest. She had seen it too often. How second chances became breeding grounds for further betrayal. Drew's confident stride, his belief that his affair with Nina had been buried beneath the surface of his new life with Willow, only made Tracy more resolute. Because if there was one thing she couldn't abide, it was deceit cloaked in charm. And Drew had mastered the art of appearing reformed, all while carrying a truth that could shatter multiple lives. Tucked away in a locked folder, and in her memory, Tracy possessed the undeniable proof, a security video clip, taken from Nina's office, capturing an illicit moment that crossed every boundary of decency and loyalty. She didn't need to hear their whispered confessions or see an exchange of promises. The footage alone, showing Drew and Nina losing themselves in a passionate lapse of judgment, was enough to dismantle any trust they had built since. And Tracy didn't need to go public to make an impact. All she had to do was put that evidence in the hands of the one person whose world would crumble the instant she saw it, Willow. To Tracy, this wasn't cruelty, it was justice. Willow had endured heartbreak, confusion, and constant emotional tightropes ever since aligning herself with Drew. She had tried to forgive, to trust again, to build a life rooted in hope. But now, she would finally see the truth. Tracy's strategy was merciless in its precision. She understood that it wasn't just about exposing Drew, but about dismantling the facade that had been carefully built between him and Willow. Once the truth came to light, Willow wouldn't simply walk away from Drew, she would be forced to reevaluate everything. Her emotional connection to Nina, once seen as an evolving maternal bond, would rot under the weight of betrayal. The woman who had once been a complicated but necessary presence in her life would now be nothing more than a traitor. Tracy knew that, in severing those ties, Willow would be left in emotional freefall. But from destruction often comes clarity. And Tracy believed Willow deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. As for Drew, his downfall would be slow and complete. He had spent months painting himself as a reformed man, a reliable partner, and a capable father figure. But Tracy knew how fragile reputations were in Port Charles, especially when built on lies. She didn't need to ruin him publicly, not yet. She wanted him to unravel on his own, to watch as the walls he thought were fortified began to crack with every whisper of suspicion and every tear Willow shed. The irony wasn't lost on Tracy that the very woman who had once been Drew's salvation would now be the reason he lost everything. And Nina, despite her veneer of confidence, would find herself isolated once again, her past sins resurrected and compounded by the realization that she, too, had been a pawn in Drew's web of self-preservation. Tracy wasn't driven by vengeance for vengeance's sake. She believed in balance, that for every deception, there must be reckoning. Drew had made his choices. He had betrayed trust, toyed with emotions, and underestimated the one person who could see through his every mask. Now, the reckoning was coming. And as she continued to nurture Joe's understanding of the Quartermaine legacy and shield Brooke Lynn from further heartbreak, Tracy kept one eye trained on the moment her plan would unfold. A moment not of chaos, but of cold, calculated exposure. She would hand Willow the truth like a loaded gun, and let her decide how to use it. In a city like Port Charles, truth was a currency far more volatile than power. And Tracy Quartermaine had just become the wealthiest woman in town. Tracy was acutely aware that resurrecting the past would unleash a storm, one filled with emotional wreckage, ruptured loyalties, and the inevitable unraveling of relationships that had only recently begun to feel stable. But for her, chaos was not something to be feared, it was a strategic mechanism, a precise tool she had wielded many times before to correct the imbalance caused by secrets and lies. In her eyes, disruption was often the first step toward restoration. She didn't seek destruction for its own sake, she believed in the cathartic power of truth, no matter how devastating it might be when first revealed. And in this case, the truth had festered long enough. It was time to rip off the bandage. When the truth reached Willow, the fallout would be immediate and irreversible. This was a woman who had spent months defending Drew, trusting him not just as a partner but as a man of integrity. To learn that he had been deceiving her all along, that he had once shared a physical, emotional entanglement with Nina, the very woman who had been the source of so much pain in her life, would shatter the last remnants of faith she held in him. And not just Drew. Nina had wormed her way into Willow's life under the guise of redemption, building bridges with talk of family and forgiveness. For both of them to be revealed as secret lovers, hiding their history while pretending to support Willow, was the ultimate betrayal. Tracy knew Willow would retreat, emotionally and physically. She would isolate herself, pushing away both Drew and Nina in one sweeping act of self-preservation. But what fascinated Tracy, and what she quietly speculated upon, was whether Willow's grief and betrayal would lead her back to the one man she had walked away from, Michael. The relationship between Michael and Willow had never truly extinguished. It had been fractured by pain, by distance, by emotional confusion, but the foundation had always remained. Tracy believed that, under the right circumstances, that foundation could be rebuilt. If Willow, devastated and stripped of illusion, came to Michael with genuine remorse and a desire to reconcile for the sake of their children and the life they had once shared, then perhaps Michael would find it within himself to forgive. Despite the armor he now wore and the coldness that had crept into his demeanor, Michael was still a father, still someone who valued the unity of family above all else. If there was any path toward healing, it would begin with Willow choosing him again. Drew, however, would have no such reprieve. Once the affair became public knowledge, he would be left to face the consequences alone. His credibility, already shaky in the business world due to questionable decisions and the shadows of past alliances, would erode even further. Tracy's evidence, if released, would not just tarnish his image, it would obliterate it. In a corporate structure as cutthroat as that of the Quartermaines, there was no room for personal scandal. His affair with Nina would be seen not only as a moral failing but as a professional liability, calling into question his judgment and discretion. And as trust in him crumbled, so too would his influence. The board would turn. Investors would murmur. The whispers of removal would grow louder until they solidified into action. Tracy wouldn't even need to raise her voice, the proof would speak louder than any accusation she could hurl. For Nina, the internal reckoning had already begun. She had told herself for months that what happened between her and Drew had been a momentary lapse, a fleeting mistake born out of shared loneliness and vulnerability. But now, as the threat of exposure loomed, she could no longer deny the truth she had buried beneath layers of justification. Part of her had wanted Drew. Had still wanted him, even after all that had transpired. She loathed herself for it, hated the way her body remembered the intimacy, the comfort, the brief escape from the suffocating weight of her public persona. But she couldn't deny that those moments had been real, raw, desperate, and painfully human. It hadn't been love, not truly. It had been two broken people clinging to each other in the dark. And if their world collapsed again, if Willow's wrath burned all bridges and Michael refused to reopen old doors, Nina knew there was a real possibility she and Drew would find themselves spiraling back toward each other. Not out of passion, not out of love, but out of desperation. Out of the shared understanding that no one else could fully comprehend the weight of their mistakes, the magnitude of their guilt. They were each other's worst decision and, paradoxically, their only solace. Tracy understood this possibility too. She had lived long enough, watched enough cycles repeat in Port Charles to know that guilt and loneliness were dangerous catalysts. The same pain that drove people apart could, under the right conditions, drive them right back together, even if doing so only made things worse. That's why she wasn't just seeking to expose the affair. She wanted to dismantle every escape route, every excuse, every whisper of comfort that could allow Drew and Nina to fall into each other's arms again. Because if they were going to suffer, they needed to suffer completely, not find comfort in the very mess they had created. As the clock ticked down, Tracy remained calm, composed, and utterly in control. She had started a chain reaction that couldn't be stopped. And in the ruins that would soon follow. The broken hearts, the shattered reputations, the burned bridges, she would stand unmoved. Because for her, this wasn't chaos. This was justice. In Port Charles, relationships are never linear. They twist and coil like vines clinging to the walls of an old estate, tangled, thick with history, and often poisonous beneath the surface. Love is rarely pure, loyalty is almost always conditional, and betrayal lurks beneath even the most sincere of smiles. It is a town where the past never stays buried, where old wounds are constantly reopened, and where trust, once broken, is seldom repaired without cost. It is within this volatile, emotionally charged backdrop that Nina and Drew now find themselves teetering on the edge of exposure. The hidden affair that once offered them temporary refuge from loneliness has become a ticking time bomb, and its detonation will send shockwaves through the entire community. No longer protected by silence or buried under layers of distraction, the truth about Nina and Drew will force a reckoning. Carly, who has long carried the burden of knowing Nina's capacity for manipulation, will likely feel vindicated, and furious. Her history with both Nina and Drew runs deep, filled with betrayals, heartbreak, and hard-won resilience. She will not sit quietly while two people who claimed redemption are revealed as deceivers. Sonny, whose emotional ties to both women have defined much of his adult life, will be forced to choose between diplomacy and disillusionment. Olivia, always the voice of conviction, will not take kindly to being misled, especially by someone she had begun to trust. And Brooke Lynn, still reeling from the emotional chaos surrounding Joe's paternity and struggling to stabilize her own world, may view this revelation as further evidence that even the most well-meaning people are capable of deep betrayal. Those who once stood behind Nina and Drew, who offered them the benefit of the doubt, who defended their intentions and overlooked their flaws, will now be left questioning their judgment. How could they have missed the signs? Were the apologies ever real? Was the healing ever sincere? In a place like Port Charles, where the line between ally and adversary is as thin as paper, a revelation of this magnitude will cause fractures that may never be mended. Tracy, ever the strategist, has anticipated this moment with the precision of a grandmaster. She did not act out of impulsive anger or wounded pride, but with the cold, clear purpose of someone who has spent decades observing the ebb and flow of power, loyalty, and consequence. She set the board carefully, placing her pieces where they needed to be, watching from the shadows as Drew and Nina moved obliviously closer to their own downfall. She didn't need to force their mistakes, she merely waited for them to make them. Now, with every secret on the verge of exposure, she holds the final move. One well-timed revelation, one strategically placed conversation, could bring it all crashing down. And she knows precisely when to make that move. When it will inflict the most damage, when their support systems have begun to erode, and when their own guilt has softened them to the blow. In Port Charles, secrets never die quietly. They rise from the past like ghosts and demand to be reckoned with. And when the curtains are pulled back, and the masks fall away, only those with the courage to confront their sins, to own them, apologize for them, and change because of them, have any chance at redemption. But for many, that kind of reckoning is too painful to endure. Drew, who once convinced himself he could keep one part of his heart buried while giving another to Willow, may find that he no longer has anyone left to believe in him. He built his new life on the fragile hope that the past could be hidden, that as long as no one found out, no one would be hurt. But he forgot the most crucial lesson in Port Charles: everything done in darkness eventually comes into the light. Whether Drew will have the strength to rise from the rubble remains to be seen. He is not without remorse, but remorse alone will not shield him from consequence. He must now face the wreckage he helped create, the devastated Willow, the betrayed Michael, the alienated colleagues and family members. And for Nina, the path ahead is no easier. Her name has long been synonymous with scandal and impulsive decisions, but this time, the damage may be irreparable. She may retreat into herself, consumed by shame and rejection. Or she may double down, blaming circumstance and betrayal rather than confronting the truth of her choices. Either path leads to isolation. Port Charles is a town where no secret stays buried forever, and no betrayal goes unpunished. It is a place where consequences echo loudly, and where even the most carefully guarded lies can unravel everything. And as the final pieces fall into place, only one question remains. Who among them will find the courage to rise, not in defense, not in denial, but in honest, painful accountability? For Drew and Nina, that question may define the rest of their lives. But for Tracy, the answer no longer matters. She has already won.